You've probably heard of Willy Wonka, the fictional confectioner and occasional meme star, but do you remember when you could go to a candy store and actually buy real Wonka candy? So, was he a real guy? And does that mean the chocolate factory was real? What about the Oompa Loompas? How far does it go? Well, today, we've got the golden ticket on how Wonka became a real candy company. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel. And after that, leave a comment and let us know what other candies you'd like to hear about. Okay, if the Candyman can, then so can we. Inspiration can be a strange and unpredictable thing. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl is a book about a kid who visits a chocolate factory, and it was inspired by its author's childhood experience with the chocolate factory. Art imitates life. Okay, there was more to it than that. When Dahl was just an English schoolboy, he lived near a Cadbury factory that would sometimes test new products by giving free samples to the local school kids and getting their opinions. And just like Willy Wonka had an arch-nemesis candy maker named Slugworth, Cadbury had an arch-nemesis called Roundtrees. They were the two biggest confectioners in England, and they routinely engaged in corporate espionage against each other, directly inspiring the rivalry in the book. Published in 1964, the popular novel would be adapted into a motion picture 3 times. The first, and arguably most iconic version, starring Gene Wilder, came about in 1971 when director Mel Stewart's 10-year-old daughter Madeline basically demanded he make a film out of it, and that her uncle, David L. Wolper, would produce it. Now, if you're in, say, missile defense, taking business advice from a 10-year-old probably isn't a great idea. But Stewart was in the movie business, so he decided to pursue the suggestion. We hope that kid got a percentage. At the time, the aforementioned Uncle Dave Wolper was working with the Quaker Oats Company to help them come up with a hook for a new chocolate bar. After he talked with Stewart, Wolper managed to work out a deal that had Quaker Oats footing the movie's entire $3 million budget. The plan was, the film would be a big hit and send kids running to the store to get Wonka bars, which would be produced and sold by Quaker, easily recouping their investment. Bing bang boom, everyone wets their beak. There was, however, a catch. Since Quaker's whole interest was in the Wonka name, they wanted it in the title, making it Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, rather than Charlie. Dahl, who would be the credited writer on the film's screenplay, even though it was heavily rewritten by David Seltzer, hated the change. But he couldn't do anything about it. He also hated that they had decided to make the film a musical, but he couldn't do anything about that either. Heck, he didn't even like Gene Wilder, the now iconic actor they picked to play Willy Wonka. What do you like, Roald? Quaker didn't waste any time, putting a subsidiary called Breaker Confections to work on the chocolate and changing that company's name to the Willy Wonka Candy Company. About a month before the movie came out, the real-life Willy Wonka Company began selling 2 candy products: the Super Scrunch Bar, which was chocolate with a peanut butter filling, and Peanut Butter Oompas, which were kind of like peanut butter M&Ms named after Oompa Loompas. Later, they would start to sell some of the products actually seen in the film, like the everlasting Gobstopper and the Scrumdiddlyumptious Bar, which was like a Toblerone, but with a less ridiculous name. Today, most people see Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory as a beloved classic that made its titular character so iconic, Hollywood could not stop making movies about him. So it might surprise you to learn that when it was first released, Willy Wonka was a worse bomb than unsweetened chocolate at a birthday party, earning just $4 million on its $3 million budget. The only person who walked away happy was Sammy Davis Jr., who scored a #1 hit covering the song that would become his trademark, The Candyman. Quaker was supposed to get some of the theatrical profits from the film, but since that dream had been flushed down to the furnace like Veruca Salt, they would have to console themselves with all the money they'd make from their real-life Wonka bars. There was just one problem. The Wonka bars were an unmitigated disaster. Despite being one of the world's biggest food manufacturers and working on the idea since before the movie was even conceived, Quaker couldn't figure out how to make a chocolate bar. No, really, they could not find a way to prevent the bars from melting, which is weird. Didn't other companies already have this figured out years ago? It was such a boondoggle that the Wonka bars weren't ready to release when the movie came out in 1971. Quaker kept tinkering with the recipe and finally got the Wonka bars onto the market in 1975, 4 years after the film had came and went with little fanfare. It was beginning to look like a bad investment. As for the movie, after it flopped, Paramount buried it and it wasn't seen again for years. In fact, Paramount cared so little for it, they let the distribution rights lapse in 1977. That made Quaker the owners again, and they didn't want it either. so they sold it to Warner Brothers for $500,000, a sale arranged by Uncle Dave Wolper himself, who wound up becoming a corporate director at the studio. It wouldn't be until the rise of VCRs in the 1980s that the movie would find its second life and finally be acknowledged as a classic. Although the movie was mostly focused on Wonka's chocolate bars, it's in the dang title, after all. You probably don't associate the actual Willy Wonka Candy Company with chocolate products. That's because when the company's pure imagination failed to imagine a usable recipe for Wonka bars, the company mostly turned to manufacturing non-chocolate candies like bottle caps. After getting burned by both the movie business and the chocolate business, Quaker decided to sell Willy Wonka to a candy company called Sunmark in 1975. Under Sunmark, Wonka started making candies like Nerds, Runts, and Spree, as well as re-releasing pre-existing non-chocolate Sunmark candy like Sweet Tarts. Sunmark would sell the company to Rowntree's, Cadbury's old rivals, in 1986. 2 years later, Wonka candies became the property of Nestle. At that time, it added non-chocolate products like Laffy Taffy, Fun Dip, and Kazoozles. To be honest, if he's making all the chocolate from the river that claimed Augustus Gloop, you probably shouldn't try the Wonka bars anyway. The fictional Willy Wonka was known for making some pretty wacky stuff like lickable wallpaper, exploding candy, fizzy lifting drink, golden eggs, and 3-course meal gum that turns you into a blueberry. He was kind of a candy terrorist. The Willy Wonka Candy Company didn't put out anything quite as cool as any of those, but it did put out a lot more products than most remember. For example, in 2010, Wonka released a line of premium chocolate bars called the Wonka Exceptionals. This included a Fantabulous Fudge Bar, a Chocolate Waterfall Bar, a Triple Dazzle Caramel Bar, and an all-new take on the movie's Scrumdiddlyumptious Chocolate Bar, which for some reason spelled Scrumdiddlyumptious differently than the old bar did. Who knew it had a preferred spelling? The line also included some fancy fruit-flavored candies like Fruit Jellies and Fruit Marvels, which were made with all-natural ingredients. There was also Wonka Donuts, Wonka Biscuits, Wonka Exploders, Fizzy Jerks, Wonka Daredevils, Tangy Bloops, Tangy Bumps, Willy Wonka's Guppies, Willy Wonka Squids, Tinglers, Rinky Dinks, Tartan Tinies, Volcano Rocks, Dweebs, Punkies, and of course, Shock Tarts Sour Gumballs. We don't even want to think about how many spoiled kids vanished on tours of all those factories. Okay, so maybe the crazy factory that eats bad kids wasn't real, but in 2005, the Willy Wonka Candy Company did launch a golden ticket contest just like the one in the movie. In both movies. Because the contest was launched to coincide with the 2005 Tim Burton film Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which starred Johnny Depp as Wonka. There were 5 golden tickets available to find in the contest, and winners would get $10,000 and a boatload of candy, which is obviously much better than transforming into a human blueberry. The golden ticket contest was repeated once again to promote the release of the aforementioned Exceptionals line. Winners of that one got a nice, round $12,500 and a trip to anywhere in the world they wanted to go. Except the Willy Wonka Candy Factory. That place hasn't been the same ever since the owner took off in a flying elevator. In 2014, Nestle pulled Wonka bars from shelves because, well, no one was buying them. For whatever reason, that chocolate had been cursed from the jump. 1 year later, they finally retired the Wonka name completely, closed down that disturbingly dangerous factory, and hopefully gave the Oompa Loompas some sort of severance package. The company was rechristened as the Nestle Candy Shop, and announcements about the name change on social media were met with near-universal disapproval. They lose, they get nothing. Good day, sir. All told, the Willy Wonka Candy Company was in business in one form or another for about 45 years. Then in 2018, Nestle sold the Wonka brand and its candy line to an Italian chocolate company called the Ferrero Group, makers of Nutella and Ferrero Rocher. The Ferrero Group, which paid around $2.8 billion for the former Wonka company, still makes some of the Wonka brand's most popular candies. That explains why you can still get Nerds to this very day, and why those Nerds now have an Italian accent. However, the only Wonka candy you can still regularly get that was actually featured in the book and movies is the everlasting Gobstopper. As the most iconic of Wonka's fictional candies, its brand name is instantly nostalgic for generations of fans. Rick Harrison from Pawn Stars even paid a cool $100,000 to get his hands on the original prop Gobstopper used in the Gene Wilder movie. We hope they explained it wasn't edible. The Wonka brand still comes out to play on special occasions. For example, it was most recently revived in connection with the 2003 Timothée Chalamet film Wonka. Sadly, there was no new Wonka bars released with the movie. But a new Wonka product was released to support Chalamet's turn in the role, Magic Hat Gummies, which are basically gummy hats with a differently flavored liquid center. They come in strawberry watermelon, magic berries, orange strawberry, and raspberry grape, all of which, apparently, will turn your tongue blue, but thankfully not your entire body. Now, if only they could get the snozberries to taste like snozberries. So what do you think? Did you like any of the real-life Wonka candies? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from Weird History.